It's time for Security Now. Steve Gibson is here, and coming up in just a bit, we're going to talk about a new chat protocol that's absolutely secure and private, OTR, and an implementation from the cypherpunks called CryptoCat, plus all your security news. Security Now is next.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Audio bandwidth for Security Now is provided by the new Winamp for Android, featuring wireless sync and one-click iTunes import. Now with free daily music downloads and full-length CD listening parties. Download it for free at winamp.com/Android.
Video bandwidth for Security Now is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com. This is Security Now with Steve Gibson. Episode 406, recorded May 29, 2013. Off the record with OTR. Security Now is brought to you by ProXPN. ProXPN is a virtual private network that allows you to use the internet the way it should be, anonymously and without oversight. For 20% off your new account for life, go to proxpn.com/twit and use the offer code SN20. It's time for Security Now, the show that covers your security online, your privacy online, science fiction, coffee, yerba mate, and anything else that is going through the brain of this man, our explainer-in-chief, Mr. Stephen Tiberius Gibson. Hello, Steve.
That would be kind of cool if my middle name.
You can take any middle name you choose, and I think you should take that name in honor of Captain Kirk.
I think that would be okay. So we have a neat episode. We've in the past talked a lot about the fundamentals of security, sort of the building blocks, and for example, we often refer to PGP as a popular means of protecting, for example, email communication. Yes. Pretty good privacy. Phil Zimmerman's famous protocol, but there are some problems with what it does and the way it works. For example, well, we'll get into that. But what I want to talk about this podcast is the protocol that underpins.
Yeah,
we'll use under.
Okay.
Beneath the CryptoCat web chatting service, which is known as Off the Record, OTR. And Off the Record is really what I want to talk about, which is more interesting. CryptoCat is just a super simple, low friction, easy to use, easy to way to get into this concept of OTR, off the record protocol usage. Yet it turns out that this off the record protocol is the key and the cool part of CryptoCat. Those guys, the CryptoCat guys, have just done a nice implementation of it. But for example, it is available as a plugin for almost all mature IM chatting clients. You can get it for XChat and for all the rest. We'll sort of enumerate those toward the end. And the way it operates, the way it was designed, and the features it deliberately provides are just, I think, fascinating and form a perfect topic for a security-based podcast.
No relation to the QCat barcode scanner.
None whatsoever. No.
There's cats in the name. That's it.
Yeah.
All right. Good. Well, this will be fun. We just have one ProXPN commercial. So why don't we? I know you have security news. So why don't we do that, and then we'll do the commercial before we talk about CryptoCat.
So probably, I don't think there's been anything that's been more tweeted in a week. Actually, it's only been 3 days. It feels like longer than that. Ars Technica, you may have seen this, Leo, or probably received your own share of tweets about it, did on the 27th a a story titled "Anatomy of a Hack: How Crackers Ransack
Oh,
Passwords."
yeah. This scared me, actually.
Well,
Because
okay,
they were talking about how a 16-character, basically random password was cracked in an hour, and I just thought, oh boy, I'm glad Steve Gibson is here to talk about this.
and thus the reason so
Yeah.
many people tweeted, because they wanted to make sure that I knew about it. And absolutely. So in their headline, they said how crackers ransack passwords, like, and then they gave the example of QEAD ZCWRS FXV1331.
That's a pretty good sounding password.
Which is like, yeah, you think that would be strong enough,
Yeah.
but it fell to these people. So I just tweeted the link to this, although you could also the URL in under the Ars Technica.com domain is how crackers make minced meat out of your passwords, all hyphenated. So I'm sure Google, if you put how crackers make minced meat out of your passwords, would take you to the article, or you just go to.
It's right on the front page right now of ours because it's
Well,
such
that
a
would
big
be it, too.
topic. Yeah, everybody wants to read it. It's
So-
probably,
A couple things. First of all, it's a 3-page read. I recommend it to our listeners because there's a lot of information there. Now, one of the things that we will spot, we listeners of this podcast, first of all, is that they chose to use as an example the weakest possible password hashing technology.
Oh,
There-
MD5, yeah.
Yes. So
Well, they
it's-
even
first of
say
all-
that. They say due to flaws in MD5, this is easier.
Well, so yes. I mean, so yeah, they do explain it,
acknowledge
but
it,
that's
yeah.
still what they use.
Right.
So while acknowledging it, it's really important to understand that these were unsalted. It was the worst hash that nobody uses anymore.
Although I
it's
should point
120
out, I think it was, who was it that was using this unsalted fairly recently? I mean, websites do use it.
Right, but one of the things that has frightened people are the benchmarks that Ars Technica ran, and so it's important to recognize that all of this is a function of the technology. That is, the technology here is MD5 with no salt and no strengthening, which is to say no iterations.
And physical access to the password database, the hash database, so that you can
Right.
run many, many, many brute force attacks on it in a second.
Now, okay. So with that said, though, I mean, there's still a lot of value in the article. So I don't mean to in any way discount the article. It is absolutely worth reading for a couple takeaways that I thought were interesting. First of all, as in these 3 pages, the author who interviewed 3 different hackers, one whose name they never knew, he remained anonymous using, I don't remember what his handle was, his Pixel or something. They interviewed them while they were working. They were all working with their preferred cracking tool, which is the open source, freely available OCL Hashcat Plus, which has its own web page and features. It's a multi-parallel GPU. It can scale to 128 simultaneous GPUs, graphics processing units, in a monster system. You don't just like load it up and go. You interact with it, which was one of the interesting aspects.
Although that third hacker was using like one kind of PC with a 7970 card. Radix wasn't using exactly the high-end stuff to crack it, right?
Well, exactly. In fact, none of them had super large hardware. They in fact, they commented at one point that because they didn't have access to their normal, cracking box, their strategies were a little different. They might have been
basically normal computers with Radeon cards in them. ATI.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. None of them were high power.
Right.
So again, that helps to offset the fact that it was MD5, no salt, and no iteration. So it's pretty much just straight, put a string in almost instantaneously. Well, yeah, I mean virtually instantaneously. Get out the MD5 hash and then see if it's in the list that you're trying to crack. So the really interesting thing that the article explains is the strategy that these three guys deploy. They have word lists. So naturally, the first thing they do is just run their word list through the hash that they know the site is using, the hash algorithm, which in this case is MD5, no salt, no iterations. That instantly turns their word list into a set of 128-bit, because that's the size of MD5's output, 128-bit hashes, which they then cross-reference with the hashed, stolen or leaked whatever password database to see if they get any hits. And bang, each of them, because they're working from their own password lists, they get varying numbers of collisions.
One list has a billion passwords on it. I mean, it's huge. So you're going to get some collisions. Because a lot of people use Sexy Monkey 123. That's for sure on that list. And if they used it in this particular database, it'll work, right?
Well, and so yes, so it's worth reading the article because they do a number of things. For example, they'll take their word lists and they'll just use them like that. Then they'll do the sort of things we would, if we were scratching our head thinking about it, we would try. Like then they try all different 4-digit combinations appended to the end. And bang, another couple thousand, are found that way. Because somebody says, sexy mama 4267, and they think, oh, that no one's gonna ever get that. Well, yeah, that came right after 4266. So that wasn't that hard to find. But the thing that I really thought was most interesting. Oh, and they did make the comment that in this case they did not know from which site this list came. Probably to protect the site. I mean, we don't know really what the history of this password of the password database was that these guys were cracking. But they made the point, obviously, that if you knew where this came from, and normally you would, because you're trying to crack passwords for that site. You know that you got the database from some site. So that's the point is that you would look very closely at the password policy, that is the password acceptance policy of that site. If that site says your passwords must be 10 characters or greater, well, they're not going to try any 6-character passwords or 7 or 8 or 9. Right. They're not going to. But they didn't have that in this case. So they did try some. I think some of them had like every possible 6-character password, just bang, as they ran that through the thing, and that took an hour, and it found some, and then they concatenated them. They tried word mixtures, and that found a bunch more. But the coolest thing of all was that once they had found 6,000 or 7,000 passwords, they actually run a Markov chain, a Markov modeling against the passwords they have found. Because what the professional crackers know is that for a given site, for whatever weird reasons of like the psychology of the people collectively going to a given site, the passwords they choose tend to be similar, which I thought was fascinating. So when it's like the site influences the password you create to some degree, or your choice to go there. Maybe if you're bringing a pre-prepared password that you use, unfortunately, across many sites, who knows what it is. But what they have found is that if they analyze the passwords they have easily cracked for statistical differences, the number of characters, the number of uppercase, the incidences, the location of digits in the password. If they look at the passwords they have cracked, it gives them a strong advantage against the ones they have not yet cracked, which I thought was, that's just so cool. I mean, that actually works. And so they did that in this process. And so they used like their standard approaches to get thousands of more readily cracked ones. Then looking at what those were, they then modified the guessing. That is that their results from the early cracking, the easy cracking, fed backwards almost evolutionarily into to drive the next generation of guessing. And HashCap Plus does all this. I mean, it's interactive. At one point, one of the guys was doing something, and it said, that's going to take 20 hours. But this was like a real-time interview mode. And they said, so he aborted that after a few minutes because it wasn't finding much, or the rate at which it was finding him didn't impress him. And so he said, okay, stop that, and let's go try a different direction. So anyway, terrific article. And thank you, everybody, for sending it to me.
What's the takeaway on this? I mean, websites obviously need to use stronger hashes than the well-known broken MD5.
Yes.
They need to salt them. But if but you don't control that. I mean, when I log into a site, A, I don't know it.
Right.
I might be able to infer it from their policy, but I don't know it. And B, we don't control what they choose. I can't say to them, well, I'm not going to use MD5. Would you use something else?
So nothing we saw in this article said that I was wrong about haystacks, which is not to say that somebody should use, a simple repeating pattern as their entire password. But the whole concept of password haystacks was to push you out, to make it easy to make a much longer password than you would normally ever have. Yes, it's true. And completely random passwords are best. That's the takeaway. And in any scenario, you want as long a password as the site will let you use, and it wants to be completely random, which means you cannot remember it.
But it is a hockey stick when it comes to password length.
Yes,
and they do show that graph.
Yes, I was going to have you bring that up ahead of time because that's sort of like, okay, I rest my case on length. That they call it, the hitting the wall, a password length. As it gets longer, it just goes exponentially straight up in the amount of time it takes to crack these. So that was my recognition, which is why I created the password haystacks concept was start with a good password and then pad it, make it longer. Because remember, they don't know anything about what you've put in until they find it. And if you make it longer, they're not going to find it. But the way the Ars Technica article ended was saying nothing beats really long, totally random. Nobody can remember that. So Ars Technica said, we will shortly be doing a series on password reminder programs, a la LastPass. And
now, does this change how I think about LastPass? Because that's the one password. I have to remember one password. I use LastPass to generate 16 or longer character passwords, random ones, for every site I join. But I do have to remember one password. That's the LastPass password. And for that, I make it long, but I use a mnemonic. Should I worry about that?
Well, and remember, one thing we do know about the LastPass guys is they're on top of this. They're not using MD5 with no salt and no iteration.
Yes. Okay.
So they recognize that they're holding a massive asset in the form of all of their customers' passwords, but we're encrypting them before LastPass ever gets them. So LastPass never gets them in the clear. Remember that all the sites we go to, they get them in the clear and then they hash them to store them. So there's a vulnerability right there.
Right.
LastPass, it's client-side encryption, really good client-side encryption. And they recently beefed up their PBK DF2 iterations. I think what they recommend was a 500. I don't remember now, but
5,000.
That's something.
I think they said.
So you're able to set that and crank it up as high as you want. Yeah. So that's happens in your browser. Then it gets sent there. Then they salt it and further mix it. And I mean, because they don't want the responsibility of having all this. So my feeling is while it is true that we end up with a rather complex and sophisticated chain of security, and we know that that's always dangerous, it is, we're storing really good passwords in a secure manner with something like LastPass, which, you and I have both chosen after, really looking at it carefully. So Ars Technica is going to follow on this story by essentially going where we've already gone and saying the best passwords are long and random. So if you can use those, you should, and you need to use some sort of password minder to manage that for you.
LastPass does so many great things now. It's gotten better and better. They've got, they've even got, if you put a credit card number in there, they'll do for free. You get some credit card watching features. They remind you now, and this has become an annoyance, but it's a good thing. If it says, hey, you use the same password on this site as you use on other sites, they'll let you know now, which is great.
Yes, they will audit your own use and say, oh, you ought to maybe fix this. It's like, thank you.
But the more I use it, the happier I am. It's just a great product.
Yeah, it's the right thing.
Yeah.
So Amazon has joined the team or the league of OAuth 2.0 site logon providers. For example, log on with your Facebook account, log on with your Google account, log on with your Twitter account. Now you can log on with Amazon. And when I heard that this morning, I immediately checked, and sure enough, they are. I was hoping they didn't just invent some random thing themselves, because that would be dumb. And they didn't. They used OAuth 2.0, which is the technology we've covered in detail. We did a whole podcast on the way that technology works, so that you're at some random site. You don't want to bother creating an account there, because you just want to post something to a blog, or you want to buy something, but you don't want to go through all of the account creation headache. And they offer you the option, log on with Amazon. And you're like, oh, I'm an Amazon user. So you just push that button. Either you're already logged into Amazon, or you bounce over to Amazon, log in with your Amazon credentials, and then the OAuth protocol working behind the scenes is able to provide an identity and whatever information the site has requested from Amazon. For example, they want, Amazon might do all of your purchase processing, but you want to provide your address and some information about yourself, so you don't have to provide that all to the site. So that's now available from Amazon. So
I just updated my Amazon password, because that's probably a good thing to make sure that's secure now, right?
Yes, that's and again, mark my words. Every time on this podcast we have said something is going to happen. Sometimes it takes a year or two, but then it happens.
Yeah,
we're gonna see an abuse of this. We're gonna see sites saying, "Oh, log in with Amazon," and you're gonna click the button, and you're going to be bounced to a fake Amazon site. I mean, this is bound to happen. Yeah. That is the problem with OAuth. So when you're using any of this log on with your, with the high value site credentials you already have, really look at where you're going. I mean, this is where you definitely want to see the extended validation coloration. Hopefully the site you're logging into offers that, so you can verify you're at them. You want to look at the URL carefully to make sure that it's www.amazon.com and it's not amazon.com or amazon.cat or amazon.cat or something. I mean, look carefully, because this is going to happen. And we don't want our listeners to get bitten by it.
Well, I wish they would adopt two-factor. They probably won't, because they're trying to sell stuff, right? And they don't want to put speed bumps in.
Well, they have two-factor now on a lot of their other services. Not on their. I don't know if it's on their main.
No, not that I know
buy a
of.
book.
Yeah.
Amazon is supporting the proper OTP, the one-time password, two-factor, multi-factor authentication for their S3 and web services and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, they're definitely there. I wouldn't be at all surprised if they're probably just working it out, and then I wouldn't be surprised if they move it forward.
Yeah,
That would be good.
Yes, it would.
And Google announced something interesting that actually was, I mean, it just sort of seemed random to me. But then in looking at the details, I thought, oh, there's some teachable bits in here for our listeners. And that is, Google has formally put out the word that they're going to be updating all of their SSL certificates. They figured it's time now to move from 1024-bit public keys to 2048-bit public keys. So they're doubling the public key length, which ridiculously exponentiates the security of the public key. Public keys, remember, don't scale their difficulty as quickly as much smaller symmetric keys do. That's why a smaller symmetric key, like an AES key, can be 128 bits or 256, whereas we need 1024 or 2048 bits in a public key. So the key length, if you had a key length like that for a symmetric key, well, there are no ciphers that operate on symmetric key lengths that long. You just don't need them. But you do in a public key. But still, this is great that Google is saying, okay, it's these 1024-bit keys are seeming a little old. But what was really interesting was that they were pre-announcing this to the developer community, because it turns out many people have taken some shortcuts, which could, if Google changed their certificates, could break authentication. But that's what the whole public key infrastructure, PKI, is designed to allow us to do. GRC, I remember I famously left VeriSign and went over to DigiCert, and I'm super happy for that. Nothing broke. And then I upgraded my certificates to EV. In fact, I just did that the other day for some subdomains because I wanted to go 100% EV at GRC. Again, nothing broke. But it turns out that there are things developers could do that are essentially taking shortcuts. And apparently Google is aware of this and would like to say, look, if you've done these things, well, it's on you, because we're going to give you some notice. So, for example, Google said, quoting them, for a smooth upgrade, client software that makes SSL connections to Google must, and this was bold, underlined italics, must perform normal validation of the certificate chain. It was like, okay, well, who wouldn't? Well, we're about to find out. It's also include a properly extensive set of root certificates contained. We have an example set which should be sufficient for connecting to Google in our FAQ. Note, the contents of this list may change over time, so clients should have a way to update themselves as changes occur. Okay, well, they're just talking about the root certificates. So they're saying do normal validation, that is, don't do something screwy, and we'll talk about what that would be. Have a mature set of root certificates, meaning that, Google's new certs are going to be signed by some major root certificate authority, like a DigiCert or a VeriSign or whomever. So you need those root certificates in order, like a mature set. It may be that some people just have, for example, only have the one root that currently signs all of Google's certificates. And then if Google were to change its provider of its certificate, then that would break software that was Google, highly Google specific. So Google is warning people, saying, don't do that. And then they also said support subject alternative names, SANs. Subject alternative names that's the technical term for one certificate being able to provide coverage for multiple domains. For example, I have GRC, one certificate, and the formal name, the so-called CN, the common name on the certificate is just grc.com. Yet the certificate is valid also for www.grc.com. And had I anticipated it, I would have also put media.grc.com in there, and you can have many. So, and those are called alternative names for the subject. So thus subject alternative names. And the idea is that it's very practical to obviously have just one certificate that covers many domains rather than having to have individual certificates per domain. So this all exists in the very common certificate standard now, which is V3, version 3, for this certificate standard, the public key infrastructure. And it's been around forever. But, some clients may not know that SANs, the subject alternative names, are really now important to support. For example, Google may not have been taking advantage of that in the past. Google is saying, they're broadcasting in advance, we intend to do that now. Everybody else has been doing it for 2 decades, so we'd like to. Thank you very much. Please make sure that if you've got any strange clients that are lagging way behind, they understand to look in the subject alternative name field if they see, because we may be providing a certificate whose common name doesn't match, and we're going to be relying on the client to accept them to look in the subject alternative name field for that match. And they said also, clients should support the server name indication SNI extension. And I'll explain that in a second, because clients may need to make an extra API call to set the host name on an SSL connection. Any client unsure about SNI support can be tested against, and then they give the URL https://googlemail.com. This URL should only validate if you are sending SNI. Now, what SNI is another very cool extension, which again has existed for quite a while, and adoption of it has been slow. The idea is that, and Leo, we've talked about this before, in a hosted website model, there's been a problem of each domain, each SSL needing to be associated with a single IP address. And the idea being that the client does a DNS query, for example, on, say, well, I'll use myself again as an example, grc.com. That gives an IP address, and it then connects to the server at that IP and will only accept a certificate that says grc.com. But as we know, there are hosting providers who have a huge number of websites all sharing a single IP. Well, the way that works for web browsers is in the query header, they have a host header that says, this is the host that I'm wanting to connect to at this IP. And so that allows a multi-domain hosting provider to hook that client up with the proper server, because the client is saying, I want this host name at this IP. Well, what SNI does, server name indication, that's similarly a way for the client in the initial SSL negotiation, for in the exactly the same way, for it to say, this is the host I am hoping to connect to at this IP. Remember that this is important, because we were talking about the client's query and the query headers, where that host header is, but that's in the actual dialogue after the security connection is established. So that's the point, is that's too late for the SSL protocol to receive the information. It needs it in that first packet the client sends to the server saying, I'm wanting to negotiate a connection with this server. So Google is saying that they're going to be in the future, they have not been already, they're going to be relying in the future on clients saying, this is the Google domain we're wanting to connect to at this IP, so that the proper certificate, and the idea is that the server then has a bunch of certificates that all might be served at that one IP, and the server chooses which certificate based on what the client has said it's asking for. So again, these are all standards that have been around a long time, but famously, software is slow to update, and it doesn't if it doesn't need to. And Google is saying, some of these things may break. Finally, they said, on the flip side of here's all the good things, they said, here are some examples of, remember we talked about, like, they said you must properly validate the certificate. And it's like, well, okay, who wouldn't? Well, apparently people don't. So they said, here's some examples of improper validation practices that could very well lead to the inability of client software to connect to Google using SSL after this upgrade. And so the first one is, they said, for example, do not do this. And that's matching the leaf certificate exactly. For example, hashing it. So, okay, now get this. Apparently, as we know, the right way, by leaf certificate, they mean the server certificate, the last one in the chain. Apparently, there are some clients which know what the Google certificate is, and they just have a hash for it. And so they don't do any public key chain following. They don't do what you should, which is take the Google certificate and then build a chain back to a valid root certificate that you have in your local root store, and then make sure that every certificate in the chain has signed the successive one, so that you trust every linkage, and since you trust the root, you trust the leaf. Well, apparently not everyone does that. They just say, oh, look, this is Google's certificate. We're just going to remember that. And Google is saying, obviously when we change our certificates, the hashes of those certificates are going to change. And so suddenly you're not going to be able to make a secure connection because you were like doing some lazy ass way of SSL. So my opinion is you deserve what you get if that's what you're doing. Then they say also matching any other certificate, even a root or an intermediate signing certificate, exactly in the same fashion. I mean, yes, nobody should be doing that, but apparently Google believes some people are. Or hard coding the expected root certificate, especially in firmware. Google says this is sometimes done based on assumptions like the following: the root certificate of our chain will not change on short notice. And the fact that it never has doesn't mean that it's not going to. And apparently Google plans on that happening. Or making an assumption. Google will always use thought as its root CA. Google will always use Equifax as its root CA. Google will always use one of a small number of root CAs. Google is saying, don't make any of these assumptions. We're planning to break all of these.
We're wily.
Or the certificate will always contain exactly the expected host name in the common name field, and therefore clients do not need to worry about SANs. So, and then finally, the certificate will always contain exactly the expected host name in a SAN, and therefore clients don't need to worry about wildcards. So basically, Google is saying, look, we're aware that shortcuts have been taken, and we're about to break all of those. So get your acts together. If you want to be able to establish secure connections to us, then here's, just do it right, 100% right. Basically, what they just gave us was all the things not to do and the things you need to be able to support. And all contemporary SSL systems have been doing this for years, for decades. So, it must be weird little boxes in the closet. We often talk about boxes in the closet, and Google is saying, we need the freedom to change. And in fact, Google maybe sort of boxed themselves in a little bit by not having changed before. like they are rigorous with the way their decisions have been made. They, if they always were using the same root CA, then someone could go, well, we'll check the chain, but we're only going to import, the root CA that Google uses because that's Google's root. And Google is saying, no. I can't wait to see who they switch to. That'll be really interesting to wonder what their logic has been.
They probably have a randomizing Python script that just picks one at random.
Yeah, I imagine they'll be dealing. They're going to certainly care about security. They're going to want to get a really good provider. It'll be fun to see.
Do you think they have like a lot of certificates, or
what they have is special? They have a certificate that lets them make their own, and that's special. So if you look at a Google chain, they are signed, I think, by Equifax, but they have a signing certificate from Equifax. So Google is minting their own certs at will for all of their various domains and subdomains. And they're a global network. It's much easier, and actually it's safer to use multiple certificates scattered around, because if one ever did get compromised, the rest of their network would not be compromised. If they used one certificate globally, oh goodness, if that ever got compromised, it would take the whole world down, their whole world.
And then Larry keeps that certificate maker in his pocket so that no one can get it.
Believe me, it is got to be guarded. There's probably some serious technology surrounding that.
I'd love to see that. They're never going to say because they don't want to.
Yeah, but it's ultimately so their certificate is signed by a major root like Equifax,
right?
But it uniquely has its own signing capabilities.
Right.
So Google can mint their own certs for whatever duration and reasons they wish, and they have that privilege because they're Google and trusted.
I want to meet Gozer, the keymaster, the guy who holds that cert. There's one guy, and you have to go to him. He said, "Hey, can I come over at 3:00 this afternoon? I need to mint some certs."
Yeah, it would be
perfect breath mint.
Be nice to have. So, I tweeted this yesterday just because I thought it was very cool, and I wanted to give a shout out about it to our listeners. It's on Kickstarter. It's a Kickstarter project. Lots of time to get in if you were interested. It's called LinkBot. LINKBOT. And so the URL is LinkBot Create with Robots. It's just a very cool project. They've come up with a modular robot module, essentially. It's a common block with Bluetooth. It's rechargeable. It's got blinky lights. It's got a beeper so it can make sound. I think it's got 2 motors that operate independently, and the idea is that you can stick these things together and like make robot arms and make caterpillars and things that walk and do stuff, all just sort of in an erector set kind of mode. It's Arduino compatible. It's got a cool feature where you can if it was articulated, if you had like a multi-joint thing, you can move it to a position and then say, okay, remember this, and then move it again, and then remember this, and move it again and remember this, and then it'll go back and follow that whole sequence for you without any programming. And it's all open source. There is a programming language that's tied into. Anyway, just very, very cool. So I did tweet about it yesterday. For those who follow me, you already know. But LinkBot Create with Robots over on Kickstarter just came across my radar, and I wanted to share it with people. And I have a neat story from a friend of the podcast who has written before, Robert Osorio, who's in Lady Lake, Florida. And he said, SpinRite resurrects dying SSD. This is not something we've heard about before, and actually the way this SSD is dying is frightening, and it's interesting that it even can die in this way. So listen to this one. He said, Steve, the other day I got a really nice example of SSD resurrection by SpinRite. A client gave me a year-old so not very old, Dell XPS 17 with an SSD boot drive that took 7+ minutes to boot. And when it finally did boot, it ran horribly slow with long pauses at the desktop. The Windows event log showed multiple disk errors, and the Dell hard drive diagnostic confirmed the drive was bad and gave me an error code. And since it was still under warranty, I had a replacement coming via overnight shipping. However, I really wanted to image the drive, if possible, since there was a lot of specialized software on this laptop and it was a mission-critical system. A fresh OS install would have been long and tedious ordeal in this case. Needless to say, all attempts at imaging the drive had failed when it encountered errors. I ran SpinRite Level 2 scan on the drive, and it detected around 12 unrecoverable bad sectors. After running the scan, the drive booted instantly into Windows. It also allowed me to create a drive image using an Acronis boot CD, which I subsequently recovered to the replacement drive, so all was well. To show how bad a condition the drive was in, I ran a Level 2 scan 3 more times just for fun. And each time, SpinRite detected even more unrecoverable sectors in different locations. Thanks for a great product, Bob. So this is interesting because this says that, remember that the cells in an SSD, the bit cells, they're so-called MLC, multi-level cells in these consumer large SSDs. So it's essentially a capacitor which stores an analog voltage. If it's a 2-bit cell, it'll store 4 different voltage values, which means it could be 0, it could be 1/3, 2/3, or full. And so the problem with multi-level cells as opposed to single-level cells is you have 3 thresholds where you need to detect the voltages rather than just 1. In a single-level cell, you'll either have a 0 or a 1, 0 voltage or full voltage, and then you have typically half of that is the threshold. If it's below that, then you know you got a 0. If it's above that, you've got a 1. And because the idea is this will, over time, these capacitors tend to discharge. And, they last a long time, but that's the technology, is just charge stored in a capacitor. And so the multi-level cells...
I had no idea it was that simple.
Yeah. And so the multi-level cells, the reason you would store, obviously, 4 voltages is to get 2 bits per cell. That instantly doubles the density of your SSD. You can go from, a 128 gig to a 256 gig. So that's really valuable, but the problem is you need to store 2 bits, meaning 4 values, and now you've got 3 threshold levels. Is the voltage above 2/3? Is it below 2/3 but above 1/3? Is it below 1/3 but not 0, and so forth? So what is happening on this particular one, it's good that this is definitely defective. It is dying as we watch. Remember that, SpinRite is running through and reading the value from the cell. If it's enough uncorrectable, if it requires enough correction, then that sector will be swapped out and another different one will be put in. But these things are dying like hour to hour. So, he didn't wait too long running SpinRite on this and then immediately doing an image in order to get this moved over to a new drive. And it's really interesting to see an SSD that is in this bad shape after apparently only a year.
I don't think that's common. You know, and most of the drives nowadays are
certainly not
MLC.
common.
It's hard to find SLC SSDs.
Yeah, that's all I buy is
Yeah.
SLC because, of course, I'm the SpinRite guy.
Is that the Intel? Where do you get that? I mean,
I bought OWC, where it was beautiful.
well, I did too, but it's an MLC
single
card
episode.
that I got. I got the Excelsior.
Well, mine
card.
were the individual drives, and I looked, but they're still small. Also, I mean, I didn't get terabyte. I'm down
Right.
because remember I'm in assembly language, so none of my
You
stuff
don't need
big.
a lot of space. Yeah.
Right. So I think these were like 60 gig drives, and I'm running them in RAID 6, so I'm only getting 40 gig, but that's way more than I need for my server because the server runs on like 2 gig.
But I suspect that a lot of the issues with MLC have been solved because it really is hard to get SLC. But I don't know. I mean, even some of the I got a pretty high-end card that's it's MLC.
Yeah.
From
for what it's
Otherworld
worth.
Computing, you know.
Yeah, for what it's worth.
Oh, you get the
SLC
Enterprise
is-
probably, right? That's what you're getting.
Yes, they are the enterprise.
Yeah, that's why they're MLC.
It's way
EMLC.
Way more
Yeah.
expensive.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it sure is. Never mind. We're talking 50 gigs for $300, $6 a gig.
Yeah, I paid that.
Yeah. Yeah. And for that you get SLC.
Yeah, enterprise class. And then I put in a RAID 6, so I got 100% redundancy. Any two of those can die, and I'm still just fine. So yeah, but I don't have to worry about my server anymore. That's all taken care of.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, that was for your server. Well, that makes sense. Yeah.
Oh yeah. That's
Yeah.
for the GRC. That's
Yeah.
my. rebuild
Oh no,
of
that
the
makes
server.
a lot of sense. You wouldn't want to do
Yes.
that necessarily on a computer, a laptop.
That would be overkill.
Yeah. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we want to talk about CryptoCat.
Yes.
Is it possible to have secure chats? We were talking about the other day, we were talking about this, I think it was on Mac Break Weekly. We mentioned the Skype thing, which we talked about last week. And then we were talking about something else, and we looked into the terms of service, and it said, well, but we will reveal the contents of this chat to law enforcement, which tells you they have the keys.
Yep.
So, CryptoCat.
Well, and you also know that they have the actual chat content because when you set up a brand new machine, it's able to show you your chat history. It's like,
that's a good point.
Where did that come from?
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Security Now this week brought to you by our good friends Pro XPN. It's Gibson approved. Leo used. You got to try it. It's a VPN, virtual private network, that lets you use the internet the way it was designed to be, anonymously, without your ISP sniffing what you do. You could use the free Wi-Fi at the coffee house or the hotel or the airport and not have to worry because everything you send out of your computer is sent through an encrypted tunnel back to the Pro XPN servers. And because they've got servers all over the world, you can choose to be geographically anonymous or fungible, I guess, would be a better word. You can say, hey, bypass all geographic restrictions with servers in the U.S., U.K., Asia, and more. Of course, you could bypass internet filtering, blocked websites. If you're worried about your ISP's 6 strikes rule, this will protect you. Works via OpenVPN, and that's for most cases how you'd want to do it. But if you're on a mobile device that doesn't support OpenVPN, they will also support PPTP. 512-bit encryption tunnels, 2048-bit keys. I mean, this is really the way. This is the way you want to do it. ProXPN.com/twit. If you want to find out more, you can cancel anytime in the first 7 days to get a full refund. They do have free accounts, but if you decide to use the Pro account, you're going to get a really good deal when you use our offer code SN20, SN20. 20% off, not just for the first year, but forever on your new account. 20% off.
If you use SN30, do you get 30% off?
Go ahead, try it. If it works, you be my guest. That's a good question. Wouldn't that be fun? SN80, I don't know.
Yeah, what the
I suspect
SN100, it's free.
It's free. I think they've figured this out. It's probably SN20 and nothing. Pro XPN premium accounts normally $10 a month. That's about $75 a year. But when you get that 20% off, you're going to talk about like $5 a month on the yearly plan. So that's a great deal. ProXPN.com/twit to learn more. Don't be this guy, it says. Don't be that guy. Get ProXPN for a true open VPN implementation that's fast, effective, does the job, and is very affordable when you use SN20 as your offer code. Let me thank them for their support and for the work they do to protect us online. ProXPN.com/twit. So QCat is a IM, instant messaging solution. Is that right?
Okay, so yeah, let's frame this properly, because I started off putting too much emphasis on CryptoCat. CryptoCat is definitely fun, definitely worthwhile. It's a web browser plugin, and also available apparently as a standalone Mac app. You have to have 10.6.6 or later, but it's also available as a plugin for, and I'm trying to look here in my notes. Where is it? There it is. Chrome, Firefox, and Safari. And I did install it on Firefox to play with it. It's a cute little tiny thing, 635K, and then you have to restart Firefox, and then you're there. So CryptoCat is a browser plugin-based secure chat system. And now we're going to spend the rest of this podcast explaining what secure chat is, because it's different than, for example, PGP-style secure email. But so what I like about CryptoCat is that it's like almost no installation, and bang, there you are able to set up a chat relationship with anybody else in the world, and it is utterly secure. Okay, and I have to define what secure means, because again, I'm using secure chat in a way that I haven't defined yet. But what I like about the reason CryptoCat is fun is it just zero friction to get into it. You load a plugin and bang, you're going. So if there's anybody you want to do chat with, you can. On the other hand, it turns out the underlying protocol, which is what I find interesting. I mean, the client there is very nice. The underlying protocol is where the meat is, and this is where the use of the word secure comes into play. And the protocol is widely available. It's all over the place. It's been around. Ian Goldberg is one of the co-authors of the protocol. He's been in math for a long time. He's now a cryptographer. We once mentioned him because he's the guy that realized that Netscape Navigator's random number generator for its SSL connections was no good, and that completely crippled the security of Netscape Navigator's early SSL. That was Ian who figured this out, in his early 20s. But he's delivered some papers about this from at least dating back to 2005. So this OTR, that's the name of the protocol, off the record. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, it is already widely available. So you can use it in existing instant messaging clients. You would obviously need to use it at each end. And in fact, it refuses not to have the other end being used if it's being used. The site where all of this can be found and links is Ian's site, which is cypherpunks.ca, cypherpunks.ca, cypherpunks.ca. And /OTR, / off the record. I think if you just go to cypherpunks.ca, it tells you need login credentials. And so you want to go to /OTR, which is a non-protected directory on that server. So, Ian, I looked at so who is this guy? He for 3 years in high school. So for, I guess, his last 3 years of high school, he was a member of Canada's team at the International Math Olympiads, where successively he brought home a bronze, a silver, and a gold medal. He got his bachelor's in pure math from University of Waterloo in 95 when he was 22 years old. And that's when he uncovered the crucial flaw in Netscape Navigator's SSL random number generator. This is the random numbers that protect the choice of key when you're negotiating your symmetric cipher. And we all know that crypto needs really high quality random number generators. It turns out that Netscape Navigators wasn't very good. We've talked about that on podcasts in the past. This was Ian who found this. Then he went on to get his PhD at Berkeley with a thesis titled Pseudonymous Communications Infrastructure for the Internet. And today he's back in Waterloo as an associate professor and university research chair, and teaches some courses every quarter in security and privacy. So, okay, so what is secure chat, and how does that differ from, for example, secure email? What's the problem with secure email? Turns out there are some characteristics of secure email which you may not want in chat. For example, the way we're familiar with PGP, and in general, we're familiar with the typical secure crypto technology. Often in crypto protocols, we talk about actors, Alice and Bob, A and B. So Alice and Bob are our two guys. And so, for example, Alice and Bob each have public key pairs, and we're talking about the normal PGP model, the traditional, protect your email communications. So they generate a public key pair. They keep their private keys private, and they make their public keys widely known. And Alice wants to send Bob a message, so she uses her private key to sign the hash of her message. And since only she has her private key, and then only she is able to sign the hash of her message. So then after signing it, she excuse me, she knows she's going to send it to Bob, and Bob has published his public key. So she uses his public key to encrypt the key that she uses to encrypt her message and sends that off to Bob. Well, only Bob knows his private key. So he's the only person who's able to decrypt the key that Alice used to encrypt the message. So he uses his private key, decrypts the key that Alice used, then decrypts the message. Now he wants to authenticate that it's from Alice. So she signed the message with her private key, which only she knows. So he verifies the signature using her public key, and if it verifies, he knows that only the matching private key could have been used to sign it. So that's our standard. Here's how we authenticate and we encrypt, that is, we get privacy with something in something like PGP. That's the technology. Says, and so like, okay, that's everything we want, right? Well, maybe, but we can do better than that. And that's what these guys recognized when they created this notion of a secure chat protocol. Because what if Bob's computer was grabbed by bad guys, maybe by criminals, by competitors, or, I don't want to call the FBI bad guys, but, the point being that, these two people, Alice and Bob, want to keep their communications private for whatever reason. So if the computer were subpoenaed by a 3-letter initial organization or grabbed under the Patriot Act.
The NFL?
Right.
CIA, NSA,
that's
FBI.
Right. NSA, CIA, FBI,
NBA.
one of those guys.
Yeah.
Then the point is that all of Bob's keying material can be recovered, and then they're able to do everything that Bob was originally able to do. And that's the key, originally able to do. So that means that they can decrypt all of his past messages to learn their content. So there goes their privacy. And they can also learn that Alice provably sent them, because the same strength of authentication that operated at the time the message was received persists, and that's key. So they not only know what Alice sent, but they can prove she sent it, because Alice's key is public, and it could only somebody who had the private key could have signed those messages with, and that's absolute mathematical certainty. So this is a problem. We can do better. So imagine just a chat, a conversation in a quiet room. Alice and Bob talk. No one else can hear them, so they have privacy. No one else knows what they say. No one can prove what was said, not even Alice and Bob, after the fact. Their conversation itself is ephemeral. It's happening, and they're each present. Nobody else is, and they can assert whatever they want to, but that's not proof. So we say that such conversations are off the record. There's even legal standing for an off-the-record conversation. You have an off-the-record conversation with a reporter, and that means something legally. It's like, you're not recording this. This is off the record, not for attribution, blah, blah, blah. So how do we achieve that? A different set of goals than, for example, secure email. We want a secure chat. So what does that mean? That means a technology we've discussed before, known as perfect forward security. That's the term used where no subsequent disclosure of cryptographic keys can disclose anything that was previously encrypted under those keys. So that's very cool. That's not what PGP has. PGP does not give you perfect forward security. As we said, if Bob's keys got loose or Alice's keys got loose, their conversations are decryptable. So we need something which is ephemeral, something which is not going to last on purpose. It's there long enough for the conversation, but inherently not long enough for a record. But the other thing which these guys have done, which is very cool, is deliberate, reputable authentication. You want to be able to repudiate the dialogue, meaning that you want to be able to say, I didn't say that, and for there to be no way for anyone to prove you did, which, again, that's what a conversation between two people in a quiet room with no eavesdropping gives you. Even the other person, the other party in the communication can allege you said something.
I repudiate you.
You can deny it.
Yeah.
You can repudiate that that assertion. So we're not talking about this casually, though. We want this in like technology. Okay, so perfect forward security means technically that a future key compromise must not reveal past communication contents. So we do that by using so-called ephemeral or short-lived keys. And what's cool about this dialogue is that is this protocol is they are constantly negotiating new keys and discarding the keys they have just used. It turns out that what they use is a Diffie-Hellman key exchange, which we've also discussed in the podcast in the past. That's the cool concept where it doesn't matter which sequence you exponentiate in. They each create random numbers. They raise a prime number to this random number power. They take the result, mod another prime number, keeping just the residue, just the remainder, essentially. That they send to the other person, and the other person does the same thing, and sends their residue to the other person. So they exchange their residues. Then they each do the same thing again, and they arrive at an identical result. Yet nobody monitoring the conversation, nobody intercepting this exchange of residue can recreate what this common number they got, because each of them keeps their own secret. They only exchange the residue from the use of that secret, and that because of taking something to a high prime power and then taking the modulus to another prime, all you get is the remainder. That's one of these hard problems. You can't go backwards. You're like a hash that throws away lots of information and distills it. This is a different kind of distillation process, but it's very fast to do. So this Diffie-Hellman exchange you can do per message on the fly, which is exactly what these guys do. Every time as you're chatting back and forth in the chat room, each side is continually generating another Diffie-Hellman exchange key and sending it along with the chat payload to the other side. They're always keeping the current and the next key present, but they're always retiring and like deliberately deleting. They're overwriting in memory and deleting the previous key. So they're constantly retiring the previous negotiated keys. They do not. Also, there is a public key technology here, because the one thing the Diffie-Hellman key exchange doesn't do is authenticate. Notice that if there was a man in the middle, he could exchange keys with Alice and then exchange mod residue with Alice, and then turn around and exchange modulus residue with Bob, and set himself up as, pretending to be each other for the other, and insert himself in the middle. So you do use in this protocol, and it's spelled out, there is a public key component where they use their public key only for authentication, not for signing, and that's the key. The mistake, such as it is, that PGP makes is that Alice signed her message using her private key, so it was non-repudiatable. Someone could say, this was signed by Alice a month ago. Doesn't matter that it was a month ago. She signed it. So, and it's because she's using her private key of her public key pair to do the signing. This protocol specifically does not do that. What this protocol does is sort of interesting. They once you've got this key agreed, they hash that to get the encryption key, and then they hash that again. That is, they hash the encryption key to get so it's derivative to get a keyed hash. We've talked about keyed hash, so-called message authentication codes, MACs. The idea is that a message authentication code is a keyed hash, which is like a digital signature that is also based on a key. So since both sides they've used Diffie-Hellman to exchange and get a big key, they then hash that to get the encryption key, which they'll encrypt their messages to each other with. And remember that they are on the fly, they're discarding these, so those do not persist, which means that no future compromise of anything they do, even other conversations with other people or the same people, that will never allow previous conversations to be decrypted, because this is per event keying essentially. But how do you get authentication? How do you know this is really from each other? You got, I would say, well, the fact that you can decrypt it and get something meaningful, only somebody who had the key could encrypt it, but that's not good enough for cryptographers. They want an actual authentication. So you hash the cipher key to get this so-called the MAC key. Now they each do that, so they each have the same MAC key, the message authentication key, and so they simply hash their message with the same message authentication key, and append the result to the message, which they then encrypt and send to each other, so they can provably authenticate. But notice what happens. Since they're using the same hash, they're not using each other's signature. They're deliberately using the same hash. That's exactly like Bob making something up that he says Alice said. But if it's in this communication, he had the hash. And that's all you, and he had the cipher key, meaning he has everything necessary to forge a message from Alice. Meaning that it is, you can demonstrate mathematically that unlike PGP, where only the other person can be shown to be the provable creator, this off-the-record protocol creates identical cipher material on each side, making them equal in the conversation, meaning that there is no way for Bob to ever assert that Alice sent him something, because he has an equal ability to create the same message that Alice sent. And then these guys go one step further, and that is, as they are retiring the cipher keys, they're always creating new ones, and as soon as they receive a message under the new key, they overwrite and discard the previous one. They also they deliberately send the previous message's hash key as part of the following message, just to sort of put it out there in the public, to sort of further say anybody who wants to can forge the previous message. They can't forge the current one. They can forge the immediate previous one. And so they've attached that authentication key just to sort of thumb their nose at anyone trying to make a case from the data which has been exchanged, by deliberately giving away everything necessary to forge the previous message. And that's off-the-record protocol. Simple.
Yeah, we would, while you were doing this, we had a kind of a back channel chat going, and I started it in Chrome, and I exited the Chrome chat. The chat persisted, and then went into the Mac app, and everybody's still in there, and it's pretty nice.
Yeah, well, so that's an implementation which I can recommend. The guys that are doing it have gone through a full audit. They had a full code audit. All of their code is open source, available for people to look at. It's like also multi-language. They've got, I don't remember, it's like 30-some plus languages, even Esperanto. It's like, what? Who actually speaks Esperanto? I guess there actually is a community.
I don't think there's like native Esperanto speakers.
No, well, apparently
there are people who embrace it.
Okay, they're well embraced Esperantans. Yes. So yes, you can use Esperanto if you wish.
Awesome.
For CryptoCat. Anyway, so I know our audience. There will be people who love the idea of being able to use either existing chat clients. For example, when I get into the Twit chat room, I use XChat as my little Windows chat client.
Yep.
Yeah. XChat supports this protocol. XChat supports off-the-record protocol.
Oh, that's neat.
And so you could use XChat, and also there are a number of Jabber clients, and so this is Jabber compatible. Is there something called Pigeon?
There's Pigeon, which is a multi-client or multi-protocol client for Windows, and I think for Linux.
And this is also it is a Pigeon plugin. There is a plugin for Pigeon, so you could use
SSI supports it as well. There are quite a few chats.
Yes.
Yeah, that's good.
Yes. So anyway, so now this is the technology. The technology is nailed. And as I said, I know our listeners there. Among our population here are people who just. I mean, it's actually there's something cool about just even though you don't need it, just knowing that this thing is so insanely bulletproof that nobody can eavesdrop on it. Unlike Skype chat, we know, which Microsoft is logging in the clear. And has the ability to send us the history on a new machine that is set up. So obviously they have our chat. Just the idea that you could have a point-to-point conversation with absolute security in a browser plugin, as we've said, Chrome, Firefox, and Safari. So that's it.
It's neat.
Yeah, they nailed it. They really got it.
Yeah. So you can download it, but you could also use it as a plugin in existing chat clients.
Yep. And again, it's Cypher, CYPHER punks, cypherpunks.ca/OTR for off the record. In fact, I think in the PDF I sent you, I called it OTP because, of course, one time password, but no, OTR. Off the record. We're getting our acronyms confused.
Yeah, the cypherpunks have been around for a long time and actually are a really great group.
Yes, and this is Ian and his gang who have put this together.
Well, that's neat. It'd be nice if you had a plug-in for Skype, but you don't. So you just have to, if you want private chat, use something else.
Yeah, I think Skype. I mean, now I'm seeing commercials on ads on
Microsoft
Skype.
Is really pushing it heavily.
Yeah.
But we use IRC, which is completely in the clear and open, and anything we do on our chat room is logged and visible, and you would never expect it to be private, right?
No. Also, I should mention that the CryptoCat folks are very close to releasing mobile clients, so there will be iOS and Android versions of CryptoCat. Also available.
It'd be really interesting is to see Google support it with their new Hangouts chat. I bet you there's a Jabber plugin for it.
Yes, there is Jabber support.
Yeah, it'd be really nice to see Google do that. And if you could flip a switch in Google Hangouts to do that, boy, that would really change the world.
Bring down the cone of silence.
Yeah, just say call it the cone of silence. That's good. Steve Gibson does his show every Wednesday, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 1900 UTC on twit.tv. We want you to watch live if you can. Always fun. Then you could try out things like the CryptoCat chat. There are about 15 people saw me started up, joined us in there.
Oh, cool.
It was kind of fun, yeah. But you can also get on-demand audio and video after the fact. Steve hosts the smallest version, the 16 kilobit audio version at his site, grc.com. Right next to that, you'll find written word transcripts written by a human being, Elaine Ferris. So they're very good, and so that's a great way to read along as you listen along. While you're at grc.com, don't forget to try SpinRite, world's finest hard drive maintenance and recovery utility, and all the freebies Steve offers. This would be a good time to visit the Password Haystacks page, among others. And if you have a question about anything you heard today or other shows or just something you just read online, like that Ars Technica article, Security Now feedback is grc.com/feedback, and we'll answer 10 questions next week.
Yeah.
If the world of security permits. If there's no breaking news. So Security Now feedback is at GRC, Gibson Research Corporation, grc.com/feedback. Steve's on Twitter as SGGRC. And what else? I guess that's about it. If you want full quality audio or video, we've got that at twit.tv/SN.
When you went to CryptoCat, did you just go into the lobby?
There isn't a lobby. What happens I downloaded the Chrome plugin, but I also installed the Mac plugin. If you want to see, I'll show it to you.
Well, there actually is a lobby. If you use
well, see, now that raises an issue because if you know the name of the chat, you can enter the chat.
Yes, and but they also, if you click, you have to poke around there, but you're able to get your own information.
Yes,
and you can click
offer
a button.
that to somebody. Say, let's do a private chat.
Exactly,
right.
but it's fun because they have, and I didn't mention this. There is a multi-party variant of this. And so they have extended this off-the-record protocol, which is inherently a point-to-point, two-party exchange. There is a multi-party variant which they're working on, and that's what they're using in that in this chat room where you can go. If you just use lobby, if you hover your mouse,
lobby
over
can be a chat room as well. So I'm in the lobby.
Yes, it's sort of. Yeah, it's sort of the default. I was just going to say that if our listeners wanted to chat with other of our listeners, it's very quiet. I've been logged in there for a day, and just like one or two people come in and they don't say anything and they leave.
But that's where you would find somebody and then create a private one-on-one chat through that. Is that the idea?
Yeah, well, or you'd probably, you somehow you do need to exchange your keying material off channel.
So I've just posted my fingerprint, which is visible on the client for private conversations, and then a group conversation fingerprint. That's the one I guess we're in.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I'd somehow supply him with this number, this key,
and that would allow him to find you.
We'd have a private chat online. It's very cool. And then once you're in the lobby, of course, you can chat with somebody else, but you can also leave the lobby and go to another chat. We had a Security Now chat, and they were fun. There were people in there. It looks just like IRC.
Yeah.
It's kind of rudimentary. You can't control the font or the colors, although I found a CSS file in the resources of the package. You could probably modify it and hack it around a little bit.
That's cool. Mostly it's super secure, so that's
nice.
Cool. Yeah.
Thank you, Steve Gibson. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, Leo.
Security Now.